Daylight savings time, or DST, is actually a misnomer. No daylight is actually saved with daylight savings time. It'd be more accurate to actually call it daylight shifting time, because what we're doing with daylight savings time is we're shifting an hour of daylight from the morning to the evening. Now, everyone is probably familiar and has heard that every time we spring forward in the spring and move our clocks forward an hour, that there's a statistically significant increase in the number of traffic accidents and heart attacks just from people missing an hour of sleep. So you could say that every time we spring forward, shift happens. It's true. Now, British Columbia recently passed legislation to make their daylight savings time permanent. So they're in the winter time, their time zone is called Pacific Standard Time. In the summertime, it was called Pacific Daylight Time. Now it's going to be Pacific Daylight Time all year round. And the same will apply for the other time zones. In Alberta, it's Mountain Standard Time in the winter, Mountain Daylight Time in the summer. So they're going to have an extra hour of light. Actually, they're going to lose an hour of light in the summer. And in the winter, their daylight sunset is going to remain the same. Our neighbors to the east in Saskatchewan also don't change their clocks. They haven't changed their clocks since 1966, when they passed legislation to stay on Central Standard Time instead of moving to Central Daylight Time in the winter, which is what Manitoba does, because Manitoba is also in the Central Time Zone. Now, what does that mean in terms of daylight on the shortest days of the year and the longest days of the year? Well, in Victoria, British Columbia, their shortest day of the year in the wintertime is going to see the sun rise now at 9:05 instead of 8:05 previously. In Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, where I was born and raised, if they were to go to permanent daylight time, the sun would rise on the shortest day of the year at 10:17 in the morning instead of 9:17 now. And the sun would set at 10:34 p.m. instead of 9:34 p.m. now. So you can kind of see why they did not go to daylight savings time, because it makes for really late sunsets. If Calgary were to go into Mountain Daylight Time permanently, the sun on the shortest day of the year would rise at 9:39 in the morning instead of 8:39 in the morning. And the longest day of the year would continue to see the sunset at 9:54 p.m. instead of 8:54 p.m. if we were on standard time. In Edmonton, times are very similar, except permanent daylight time in Edmonton would see the sun rise at 9:50 in the morning instead of 8:50, and would continue to set at 10:07 instead of 9:07 on daylight savings on Mountain Standard Time. Sorry. Now, the argument over whether to go to standard time or daylight time is typically framed around preferences. What do people prefer? Do they like to have an hour of light in the morning or in the evening? But I would argue that it's actually a question of health and safety and productivity, for that matter. Most people who are surveyed on what they want typically will say they like to have an extra hour of light in the evening. But I think that's just because they haven't experienced permanent daylight time and the effects that will happen both in the summer and in the winter when it changes. The human body is basically driven by sunlight to regulate our sleep, our hormones, and our cognitive performance. We need that sunlight in the morning. Artificial lighting in the morning will allow you to see in the dark, but it can't replace natural sunlight, and your body still knows that it's in the dark. And the effect of getting up in the dark is that you will suffer from what's called sleep inertia, or just grogginess. Under permanent daylight savings time, everyone is going to be groggier in the winter mornings for weeks longer than they would have otherwise under standard time. Now, for someone in my line of work, that grogginess is going to translate into reduced productivity in the wintertime, when I'm so sleepy. If someone works in with heavy equipment, or is a first responder, or just has some type of dangerous, say, construction work, that actually translates into increased safety issues with people getting injured or killed because they're groggy and dealing with dangerous equipment. And I don't have to tell you that if you drive to work and commute by car, that's a piece of dangerous equipment too. So that's going to increase the likelihood of accidents for people who are driving um, just because the sun's setting up later in the morning. Now, one of the proposed benefits of having an hour later in the evening is that people have extra sunshine, which is actually not what you want to have on the longest day of the year, because if the sun is setting at 10 p.m. and you normally go to bed at 9:30, you're going to bed when it's still bright outside. That causes the body to not produce the melatonin ahead of time to make you sleepy, which means you're not going to get as good a sleep, and you're going to be groggy in the morning as well in the summertime because of the later sunlight. So I kind of framed the question around the speech as to whether or not what Alberta should do with daylight savings time. And I'd have to say that Alberta and every province in Canada should revert back or should revert to permanent standard time. So we have that extra hour of light in the morning, and we're not affected by having extra light when we should be going to bed in the evening. Thank you all.